Hello, it's Seb. Welcome back to my channel. I'm going to do another recent reads. This time I'm going to hopefully tell you about all the books I read at the very end of last year and bring us up to date. So we are, from next time I do one of these videos, I want to just be talking about 2023. So to begin with, the first 100 pages of R.F. Kuang's Babel. Why it's 100 pages I'll get to in a bit. This is kind of like post-colonial Harry Potter. The story is about a boy from Hong Kong who later takes the name of Robin. He's taken to the UK to study at Oxford. And in this world, it's the 1800s, it's early 1800s, I think. And in this world, there is magic connected to silver, like the mineral silver. And this is a really kind of clever premise, I think, because it allows the writer to tell this story of like kind of magic and schools and friends and growing up and taking classes and like kind of the wonder of university, which is sort of like described as this subgenre dark academia, which a lot of people like. It seems. But yeah, she does that, but also because the magic is connected to a resource which the British Empire has a monopoly on, from extracting it from countries all over the world, then it's obviously there's something, underlying all this nice wonder of knowledge and learning and friendship is the kind of the nasty reality of colonialism, right? Like that colonialism is propping up everything. And the British obviously have a monopoly on magic because they have a monopoly on silver because they are an empire and blah, 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 right? So the main character, Robin, his kind of journey is, like on the one hand, having these classes where he's learning things and like being amazed by like the powers of silver and so on, and on the other hand kind of feeling like he doesn't quite fit in and questioning things and understanding the unpleasantness of colonialism that underlies everything. And he's got this struggle of like what side does he belong on, because he starts to realize more and more through like the different kinds of prejudices and things that he faces. And the more he learns about how things work in the world, which is also what happens, in the university experience, he starts to discover more and more that you can't really sit on the fence for a lot of things when it comes to your values and your commitments to how you want to live your life, basically. So it's kind of about growing up as well. The other important thing is like this theme of language and translation, which you could guess from the title. In this Oxford, there is a tower called like kind of nicknamed Babel, which is the Translation Institute. This is where Robin studies with his friends, and this is where like kind of all the magic happens, because the way that the magic works is that with a bar of silver you write one word and then you write another word. You have to know both languages. You can't just like be told like the translation, and then what's lost in translation, the gap between the older word and the newer word is sort of like kind of summoned or brought into reality somehow. So one example that I read recently is that there's this ancient Greek word for boat, which also has a connotation of like a sea creature, but like in a later language it's lost the connotation of sea creature. It just means boat. And so if you use that bar of silver and you sell it to a fisherman and the fisherman puts it on his boat, then he'll get more fish. It doesn't make new fish appear in the world. It just means that he's more likely to get fish. So it's that kind of magic. It's kind of tinkering with reality rather than, causing huge explosion things. It's sort of subtle things, but things that would make a difference. Obviously if you can get more fish, you get more money and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far. The reason it's only 100 pages is because I got it out of the library and, I'm reading other things at the same time, and it's a very popular book, so I have to return it after 2 weeks. And 200 pages was what I got through in 2 weeks before I had to send it back. And I didn't expect to get it until spring, but actually, surprisingly, it came back just recently. But it came back at a really awkward period because I've been like kind of sick and busy, and I had other books on the go as well. So I managed to read like I think another 40, maybe 50 pages of it, but then I had to send it back again. So I know it's kind of getting ridiculous at this point, but I'm still really engaged in the story, even though I'm reading it in this really sort of like chopped up way. The good thing as well is that it's going over long periods of time. Like when I read the first 100 pages, I went from, Hong Kong to London, and then his first year at the university. And then like when I read these recent 40 pages, it's like his first year came to an end and he just started his second year. So the fact that time moves quickly actually means that it's easier to read over a long period of time, because I feel like I can have gaps in the reading, and they're doing their university life, they're going to classes, they're getting to know each other, all that stuff is happening in the background. If it was like a really intensive novel that happened like all in the space of a day or something, then I don't think I could read it in this style. But because of the style that it's written, I'm kind of okay with reading it, long term. We'll see how that goes with the rest of the book. I may just have to buy it in the end because I am really enjoying it. I actually just got it back and then just had to send it back yesterday. I went to the library and gave it back a second time yesterday because it came at such an awkward time. I do have a few little problems with it, but basically the main one is just that like there's this one character who is like obviously, to me, so obviously supposed to be, like either a baddie or like have some sort of dark secret, and I don't know, like they've put like little like a sort of hint, like where one character says a phrase and then he says the phrase, and like it's kind of, it seems none of the main characters notice it, but the reader, I noticed it. So I feel like if it's going to be a big twist, I want it to happen really soon. I don't want it to be like a huge twist at the end of the novel, because that would suck. Like, it's not nice when you feel like you know more than the main characters know, I think, usually in this kind of book. So yeah, like that's kind of annoying, but hopefully that gets resolved pretty soon. Whether it's a red herring or just an ordinary herring, I don't care. I kind of want it out of the way so that I can get on with the story and feel like I'm back kind of with Robin and his friends, immersed in that world. Next up is Otama by Mieko Kanai, translated by Tomoko Aoyama and Paul McCarthy. This is a book about a guy in his apartment in Tokyo, and then suddenly this other guy appears with a cat and says, here, you got to take care of this cat. Also, my sister, who you had a thing with for a while, she's like pregnant and disappeared. But don't worry, it's not your baby. But do take care of this cat. So it's all that kind of confusing. What exactly is going on with these relationships? Kind of vibe is how it starts, and that continues all the way through. It's pretty short, as you can see, but it doesn't feel short at all, because. Well, I guess it depends how you read it. Not much happens in this book. Lots of different characters who are connected to the missing sister appear, and they stay at this guy, he's called Natsuyuki, they stay at his apartment. And yeah, they're just kind of hanging out, often talking about art, talking about movies, being disappointed a lot of the time, and ordering sushi and like kind of drinking alcohol, and like, yeah, that's kind of the vibe for the whole book. There's not a lot of plot here. Mieko Kanai is one of my favorite writers, so I was a little bit nervous going into this one because I've heard that it's way more like kind of chill than some of her older stuff, which is what I'm more used to. And it is chill, but from the second page, I recognized her voice instantly, and I thought, yes, I'm going to be in for a good time, because she wrote this kind of thing where, like, when the guy is presented with the cat, he has this sort of stream of consciousness about, like, in the middle of his conversation with the brother, it's got this sort of, like, he's thinking about whether or not he used a condom when he slept with this guy's sister. And he's sort of like, it begins with, like, well, of course I used a condom. And then like he starts talking about condoms. And then he starts thinking, well, there was this time where I'm not sure if I used a condom. And then he starts thinking about like sex in a more abstract way, in a sort of philosophical way. And meanwhile, the cat is in the apartment, like kind of sniffing things and like feeling freaked out, like because they're suddenly in this strange new world, while the guy's having all these psychological defense mechanisms in play. And he's having a conversation at the same time. So there's this huge like kind of like mundane but very polyphonic atmosphere, because like it feels like there's so many voices happening all at once, and like they're covering up things like human insecurities and this unwillingness to take responsibility for one's actions and so on. The thing that I liked most in this book were the way that there were all these scenes where you have lots of little moments which flow together nicely but without obvious logical connections. So then you're trying to figure out what the connections between them are, and they often have this very resonant, I think quite powerful feel to them. Like there's this one scene where he's remembering how when he was a young boy, his mother walked out on his family, and so he and his father were going around looking for her, like going to relatives, going to friends, and he's describing that. But somewhere in that description, it changes to he being with his mother, and his mother explaining to him why their father walked out on them. And apparently both things did happen. And the way that it's just sort of the way that the words are strung together in this natural way, which does feel like sort of confusing, but also like it makes some sort of logical sense outside of what we're used to. That is where Mieko Kanai shines so much in this book. That and the sort of theme of care, like taking care of things and like the value of caring for things. And the ending was, I thought, like amazing. So like those were all the amazing things in it. The not so amazing things are that like well, there's a lot of references to culture, right? And unlike, it did actually remind me of Haruki Murakami in some ways, because he also references pop culture all the time, and he also has like characters who are sort of despondent in Japan and like, looking for a lost cat or something like that, and feels symbolic of something greater. But this is, outside of that superficial like kind of level, they're totally different. I much prefer Mieko Kanai's world, I think. I'm kind of glad I read this now. Like, I think if I read it, like when I was a, teen and reading Murakami, then I wouldn't have liked this as much as I like Murakami, if that makes sense. There are so many coincidences in this book as well that it often feels like it's kind of veering on magical realism, but like it doesn't quite go there. And I don't know, I quite like that as well, because that adds to the sense of things not being quite logical in this version of the world, but at the same time there is some sort of sense to the way things run together, and like that coincidences are uncanny, and that's kind of like where the sense of unease, I think, often comes from, underneath the sort of chill, just hanging out in an apartment, chill vibes that are going on for most of this book. But yeah, what I was saying before was the things that aren't so good are sometimes, I think, like one of the main issues I have with this is that sometimes all the references can be a bit alienating, the pop culture references, because like like there's lots to do with movies and lots to do with art and photography. The main guy is a photographer, I should have mentioned, and yeah, like they'll just go over your head, and I think they're meant to go over your head. At least they went over my head. I'm sure there's some people who are knowledgeable enough about all these things to get them, but like I think you're kind of meant to feel a little bit isolated and not know what they're talking about sometimes. One of the characters, the brother who brings the cat, who is incidentally a porn actor, he doesn't know any of the art references, and he complains at like one point, or maybe more than one point in the book, about the way that people talk in this book. So I think like the author knows what she's doing here. Also, like one of the like prominent references that they talk about is not real. And like at first I was like, okay, that person probably isn't real, and then I thought about it more, and the more the book went on, I was like, really starting to sound like they're real. So I had to look it up, and apparently like she does this Borgesian, this thing that Borges did, like that he was famous for, of like mixing fact and fiction, historical fact and fiction, and referencing people as though they're real when actually they just came out of his head, but writing about it in this very authoritative manner where it's quite convincing, and so that's quite interesting. I never read that kind of writing from Mieko Kanai, but yeah, like it does kind of push you away from what's going on, I think, at times. One of the things as well that I wish I had known is that it's in the introduction, but I always skip the introductions when I read. But maybe this one would be a good one to read, actually, the introduction before getting into the book, because it tells you that every chapter title is actually a pun on a famous Japanese piece of literature. So I think that just kind of adds this playful, structure to everything you read, this kind of tongue-in-cheek jokiness, which I think helps the novel. I think it needs a little bit more like jokiness sometimes. But I did really connect with the main character and just how he feels about life. And he does have some universal sort of, thoughts as well about aging and about loneliness and about failure, which are really interesting and engaging to read. So yeah, it took me ages to read this little one, because it's a lot to get through, and sometimes it was, I would say, a bit boring to get through, but it was still so worthwhile. And when I was doing one of my last videos and looking up Mieko Kanai for whatever reason, I saw she has a new English translation coming out this year by Fitzcarraldo. I forget what it's called, but I'm so happy it's being published by the Fitzcarraldo Press, because a lot of people on BookTube like those ones, right? The blue Fitzcarraldo books. So I feel like maybe if she gets a book published there, then a lot more people will start reading Mieko Kanai, possibly, perhaps, at least that one. I'm definitely going to be reading it, and I'm super excited for it. I don't know the title, but yeah, I'm really, really, really psyched for that one. Then I read a book of poetry, Hera Lindsay Bird by Hera Lindsay Bird. These poems were so ironic and witty and jokey, like more jokey than witty, probably, which is not like a bad thing, because the jokiness, she tells really good jokes. It's quite cynical, raw, fresh, modern, vitalistic, maybe. I could just like keep stringing together adjectives, because like it's hard to describe a book of poems I think, without actually just like reading a few poems. At least I'm not so good at it. My favorite one is called Planet of the Apes because I love the movie and this poem does it justice. But it's not really about the movie, it's about love and stuff like that. Most of them are love poems, I should say. There's another very funny one called Monica Geller from Friends, or maybe it's just Monica, I think. But yeah, it's about Monica from Friends, and it's like it's got the sort of jokey things, but also then it goes into a relationship, and like she uses like her feelings about Monica to then like kind of jump into her feelings about a relationship and then go back to Monica, and like it's funny and very sad and very relatable. I feel like this book like won't be for everyone. I think a good way also to like think about whether it be for you is to look at the titles of the poems before you go in. Apart from Planet of the Apes and Monica, there's also Children Are the Orgasm of the World, I think it was, and a really good one which is Keats is Dead, So Fuck Me From Behind. And that was like absolutely fantastic, and it was really kind of thrilling to read it on the bus and feel like other people might like look over my shoulder and see I'm reading something, because you know the title is pretty big on the page. But yeah, I love that poem as well. So but if just the very idea of reading a poem like that sounds like it's going to be cringe, then maybe, you know, there are some bits which I thought were a little bit cringy, or one of the ways that I felt it didn't often work is because she sort of like she uses the joke to go into something like really deep and profound and affecting and relatable, but then often at the very end of the poem she goes straight back to a punchline and she just makes it a little joke at the end. I think the Keats one was something like that. For me, I would prefer like that you end with the earth-shattering profundity rather than bring it back to sort of a gag thing, because I feel like that kind of diminishes the affect, you know, of what you've gone through after you read the poem. But yeah, I think that's probably harder to pull off. It's also sort of like so drenched in irony that I feel like that would be off-putting for people. In some ways it was off-putting for me, but like I feel like she goes kind of through irony and out the other side to sort of raw honesty as well. So that mixture sometimes didn't work so well for me, but generally like it was great. Another poem now, I read this illustrated version of Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. It's because it was like Christmas, and so I guess there were lots of these things around and I just saw it in the shop, so I read it. But this was illustrated by someone called PJ Lynch, and it was gorgeous. It was so nice. Like, this is one of my favorite poems, and it was so like about somebody who just like kind of who is stopping by woods on a snowy evening, I guess, and thinking about and just like observing the snow instead of going where they're supposed to be going. And the illustrations have this sort of like grainy but grand and sweeping look about them. They're like, you know, really big pages, and yeah, like the voice of the poem is this girl with braids, and you know, I love an effective gender swap, like a really effective gender. I'm not even sure if this is an effective gender swap, because you know the voice of the poem doesn't have to be male at all, and so like it's not even like doing anything that radical by having the main character be a girl. But like since I was young, I guess it's just been this sort of monolithic image that the voice is a man. Also, it's sort of like a stereotypically male image, I think, to be like kind of, you know, doing your work outside but then stopping and like kind of being struck by philosophical contemplations and blah blah blah, and the call of the wild and all this stuff. These are all like, I feel like, you know, bound to masculinity. So having it be like a kind of a younger girl, and the way that like she looks so joyful as well when she's connecting to the world around her, and the little horse and everything. Oh, it's just so good, and it's so nice to have an old favorite like made fresh again, right, with the pictures and the gender thing. And yeah, it was great. Then I read this one which I think was kind of popular on YouTube. I saw a few people that I follow talk about it, at least, which is why I picked it up on audiobook, and that's Matrix by Lauren Groff, which is a historical fiction about these nuns in a sort of a convent, and I think it's like 1500s, it's medieval, and this woman Marie is sent from France to England, and she's sort of like, she's got royal blood in her, but like because her mother was like raped by a king or something horrible like that, so she's you know, like she's got like kind of both high class and low class at the same time. And when she goes to the monastery, she's, because of her royal blood, she's given like this very very high position. I think like the highest position, I forget what it's called, not like the abbess, but something like, you know, in charge of the convent. I said monastery, did I? The nuns are convents, right? Anyway, the nun place, right? And she's got this high title, but she arrives there and she's like quite young, and she's like really big, like physically she's really tall and like big boned and like kind of, you know, like I think quite masculine in many ways, and she's like taunted a lot. And yeah, from the beginning, Marie's position is both like an outcast and an authority figure in the convent, and like that was very confusing for me because I couldn't quite understand or believe the way that people treated her, because they were treating her like they were, you know, like kind of bullying her, but at the same time they had to, you know, defer to her. And like I feel like that's something that like could be done in a very interesting, convincing way. Obviously it's true in life that you often have positions where you have a huge amount of authority in one sense, but you also are, you know, like at the bottom of the barrel in another sense, right? But I didn't feel like it worked for me at all for some reason, so I was really not able to get into this from the get-go, and I was about to put it down, but then suddenly time sped up. Suddenly the years started going by, like every page would be a couple of years. And I say page, I was listening to it, you know, every, I don't know, every minute, let's say, would be a couple of years. And yeah, that was, I really like books that go quickly through time, because suddenly I thought, oh, what's going to happen? Is she going to die? Because if we keep going at this pace, she's definitely going to die before the end of the novel. And then we're going to have new characters. So I guess it's going to slow down at some point. But what would be the point? And why would be the point of it to slow down, right? So it adds this kind of tension, which was interesting. And also because like the inner workings of her mind were really boring to me. So to then sort of see just like convent life passing, and you know, the different characters doing things, and like the way that things developed throughout the seasons, that was way more interesting for me. And I think it often is. I really like books, I think, which go quicker through time. Like lately for some reason. Maybe it's just a thing I like, I don't know. But yeah, so I was waiting for time to slow down, and eventually time did slow down, and I thought, okay, I'm probably going to give up on this book now that time has slowed down again. But then she starts having hallucinations at the point that we go back into a sort of a more usual rhythm for a novel, right? And the hallucinations were interesting because they're kind of like surreal, weird, trippy things, and she starts using them as a guide for what she does as the leader of this convent of nuns. So I like the trippy stuff. That was interesting. But then after a while, that got kind of dull for me, and I didn't care. I wasn't invested in any of the relationships. I didn't care about any of the characters. I didn't care about what was going on. I don't know. Nothing grabbed me really about the writing. I was just, except for the hallucinations. So yeah, I gave up at the halfway point, and this was a DNF for me, unfortunately. Next, I read The Promised Neverland Volume 4, which I have returned to the library, but I do have Volume 5, so, oh, that's very bright. I do have Volume 5, where can I hold it? There. So you can see it there, so I can hold something, I guess. And it's the Volume 4 is like kind of the climax of this story, which I've realized it's difficult to talk about series in these kind of wrap-up videos, because like I have to kind of keep repeating the same intro over and over again, because you obviously, you know, don't want to spoil things that happen as they go on. But basically, you know, it's an orphanage. It's a sort of a sci-fi fantasy, maybe dark kind of sci-fi, where there's these kids in an orphanage, and they find out that when you get to a certain age, something terrible happens to you, so they have to escape from the orphanage. So it's an escape story, kids versus adults. Kids have to, like, it's like a lovely idyllic little natural place, and there's a big high wall enclosing them, and so they have to find out what's on the outside, and you know, like all this stuff. It's very exciting. In Volume 4, everything comes to a climax, because the three main characters, Emma, Ray, and Norman, have been kind of plotting against each other. And that's the thing that's most interesting about this series for me. The fact that the three main characters are never putting all their cards on the table, really, because they all have different ideas and different values about how to proceed with this huge life-changing thing that they're going through, the escape, right? And so because they care for each other, because they think that the best way forward is something that not all of them would agree with, they have to keep things back, and that's interesting. And in Volume 4, I think basically everything is revealed, and every character knows what every character has been thinking. So, you know, a lot of the tension is diffused, but in a big, huge climactic way. And it ends on a big cliffhanger, which feels like it's the end. So I feel like this is the end, but it's only Volume 5 of many volumes, right? I originally watched the series, the anime of this, and the bit that I read in Volume 4 was like the main climax of the first, you know, season. So it is the end. So I don't know what's going to happen after this one. So that's very exciting. And like it ended on such an exciting point that I'm really looking forward to reading this. Then I read Bitter Orange Tree by Jokha Alharthi, translated by Marilyn. This is an Omani story about grief, about an international student from Oman in, I think, Edinburgh in Scotland, and she's remembering her grandmother in Oman, who's died, and she wasn't there she never went back to see her before she died, and so she's got all this guilt and regret, and she's kind of going through her family history, and it's sort of a family saga, but like all colored by sadness and grief. And normally that, like, if I heard that description, I would think this book is not for me, because I do not usually like books that like kind of dwell on grief, in my experience so far anyways. But Jokha Alharthi's writing is so good. I will read anything she writes, and I love this book as well. Not just the writing, but also the fact that her grief stuff is not just about grief, it's also about love. She's really interested in love. You can see that in her other book translated into English, Celestial Bodies. So she works in like lots of love stories as well, and there's a love triangle which is really fascinating. Her writing style is like all these stories strung together, and they're branching out in different directions, which sometimes feels like it's not unified or cohesive, but I really like the tangential kind of writing. I like tangential writing, I suppose, in general. It feels often like character studies, but like she can really convince you of a character, I think, in just a few paragraphs, where you totally believe in that character and you're invested in them, and then that character is gone. You'll never hear from them again, or maybe you will, like, a few pages later, and then they'll be gone, and like you don't know. It's that kind of unpredictability of how people come and go is something I really like. Also, it reminded me a bit of Pedro Páramo, which I have somewhere. This is just like one of the best books in existence. It's just like kind of floating in an ether above all other books as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, the ending of Bitter Orange Tree kind of reminded me of the ending of this one, and like some of the elements of like storytelling as well, of like kind of having different voices coming and going, in sometimes in a sort of fairy tale-ish way, but covering, something that's really sad, essentially, and like basically very sad at its core. Anything that reminds me of Pedro Páramo is obviously going to be a good book in my opinion. Next was some kids books, mainly because I had a challenge for myself to read 50 books by the end of the year, and I wasn't going to meet that challenge, so I decided, to sort of like boost the number a bit so that I could get to that 50, I decided to go into a bookshop and just quickly read some kids books. I know maybe it sounds cheap, but I was actually thinking, I haven't read much children's literature this year, so I did want to read more. First of all, The Very Hungry Caterpillar's Night Before Christmas by Eric Carle. I just was very surprised that there's apparently a whole series of Hungry Caterpillar books. I had no idea, and so I picked this one up and read it. It kind of felt like, like a movie star who originally had this great hit, which was like so amazing and like soulful and powerful that it really moved people, and their performance was so great. So ever since then, their career has been totally made, and all they need to do is cameo in other films and just like make an appearance, and everyone will be like, oh my god, it's that guy, right? But yeah, this book basically felt a bit soulless to me. It's sort of like, oh yeah, it's The Very Hungry Caterpillar, but with polar bears or with Santa, and it didn't have the same power of the original, and it did feel like almost like a cash in for Mr. Caterpillar, but still, like I think the pictures are gorgeous because anything Eric Carle draws is amazing, and as a kid I think it would be really fun to read this book because you'd be looking for the caterpillar in every page, because he's quite small in this one. He's not like in the original where he takes up the whole story. He's like little caterpillar appearing in different positions. So if you're a little kid, you'd be like, oh, where is he going to be this time? And that would be really fun, right? So yeah, fair play to him. I cannot begrudge a bug his cameos. Then I read This Is Not My Hat, which is a reread. That's by Jon Klassen. It's about a little fish who steals a hat because, why shouldn't he steal a hat when it looks better on him than on the other fish? And he's definitely going to get away with it. You can rest assured, because he knows a place where he's going to be absolutely safe forever. So yeah, it's one of my favorite books of all time. Illustrations, amazing. Jon Klassen, does like loads of emotion with just like little eye movements, and the backgrounds are just black, so it's like you feel like you're in the bottom of the sea, and like this pit where there's seaweed and everything moving around. It's so immersive, and yeah, like it's like Dostoevsky for kids. Then I read The Fate of Fausto. I don't remember the author. I'll put his name in the description below. I think it was a he. But yeah, this is about a guy called Fausto, which is an ominous name, obviously, and he goes around. He's just like owning things. I think he starts like saying, I own the trees, I own the flowers, I own the mountains, and he's going around convincing the things that he owns them more and more. until things spiral out of control. I didn't really like this one. The pictures were nice, but kind of, I don't know, they were just nice to look at. I felt like kind of the things you could find on the internet in a comic strip, oh, that's a nice little thing. I feel like when you see pictures on the page, they should impact you more than when you see them on digital screens personally, and this didn't really do that for me. So the illustration style was, I don't know, cute but a bit bland, I thought, and the story had this moralizing which felt like, I don't know if it was just that it was so simple, but also that I kind of disagreed with it, like both of those things happening at the same time. So it wasn't really for me. I liked it. It gets a bit dark at the end, which is nice, and would be nice as a kid, I guess, but I don't know, actually. Also, it's maybe because of the level of darkness, I don't think it's for very young kids. So, and I think older kids, I wouldn't want to be teaching them this kind of moral stuff anyways. So anyway, forget the fate of Fausto. Then, because I had listened to the audiobook of Othello not that long ago, I decided to do it again. This was also because I wanted to make up my number 50 thing. I thought, let's get another play in. So I listened to Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. The version of this production, I don't remember who did it or what the actors were or anything. But Kelsey Grammer was in it, yeah, but I don't know, he was just a really small part, Roman guard or something. But yeah, this was all Americans. So I did this in high school, and I don't know, the way that they taught it, I had this image of kind of stuffy Roman politicians and stuff like that, but listening to it, it's all whispery Americans in this sort of gothic world of treason and intrigue. And I don't know, the whispering was great, honestly. Listening to an audiobook where people whisper a lot is something that I hadn't done. It's kind of ASMR, I guess. I really like the vibes. As with all Shakespeare, when I listen to it at a speed that they do for performances, I miss a lot, but I rewound a bit, and sometimes I looked online to get the really good quotes. Things that really stood out for me was the political instability, the sense of a city where just things are unstable, and the normal people feel that instability. That felt so relevant, because I remember when I came back from Japan and I went to London, I actually walking around the streets, I could feel some of the conflicts, I could see them in graffiti and stuff like that, and all stuff that I'd missed out on for years, but loads of leftover hangovers from COVID and Brexit and all this stuff. I was and all these kind of anti-trans things, and it was suffocating. But yeah, I kind of felt that as well in this thing. So yeah, the not less political, maybe social instability, but also the gothic atmosphere. This has got to be the most gothic play that Shakespeare did, I think. And that's, even thinking about Macbeth and stuff like that, I think this gives Macbeth a run for its money. There's this storm, and there's all these portents of doom and death. And yeah, that was really, really fun. Also, something that, when I did it in school, the way they taught us and the way that I remembered it was that one of the main characters, Brutus, maybe kind of the main character, Brutus, is this kind of noble hero who is a good person at heart, but he's kind of forced in by these bad conspirators into supporting a coup d'etat, and so he kind of ends up on the wrong side of history, even though he's actually a good guy. And yeah, that's kind of I think at the end of the play, some people say something to that effect, like you're supposed to take away that message. But this time, oh my god, I hate Brutus. Brutus is so spineless and annoying, and kind of justifying all the things he does, including murdering one of his best friends with these appeals to the greater good and morality and what's the best for the city and all this stuff, and these sort of inner abstract things about right and wrong, whereas actually he's just being pushed around and manipulated by people around him, whose wills are obviously much stronger than his, in my opinion. So yeah, boo to Brutus. And lastly, the final thing I read in 2022 was from this little book. I don't know if you can see it without a big glare, the Theban Plays by Sophocles. I read Oedipus Rex, or what do they call him? Do they call Oedipus the King? They call him King Oedipus in this one. The title is so fascinating, but that's a story for another video. But yeah, I another play that I did in high school, and again, it was really kind of revealing to read it again. For those who don't know, this is about, I should have said Julius Caesar is about the assassination of the Emperor Julius Caesar by a bunch of people around him. But yeah, I feel like probably a lot of people know that. And probably a lot of people know this one as well. This is about a Greek king of Thebes who, there's a big plague. that comes to his city, and he gets a prophecy that the person who murdered the old king is in the city and polluting the city, and that person needs to be got rid of, and then the plague will go. So he's gonna do that. He's determined to do that. But actually, so it's kind of like got a detective vibe to it, which was very surprising because, this is a super old tragedy, right? Like 2,500 years or whatever. And it's got this really kind of modern feeling of like plot development, like getting clues and then from the clue moving on to another thing and then getting pushed back a bit. And like, also, it's got this big exploration of identity and selfhood and knowledge, and like knowledge is suffering, which is a big thing in like kind of the Western canon. I was surprised how plotty this felt, especially because all the most recent tragedies I've read are by Euripides, and his stuff I would not describe as very plotty at all. It was almost like so perfectly structured and so perfectly nice in the way that it communicated its themes and its ideas and stuff like that, that it kind of felt a little bit, I don't know, it's weird to say something's bland if it's perfect, isn't it? But like, it felt too neat. That's the word, neat. It felt a bit too neat for me, compared to, again, like the Euripides plays that I've read, which are kind of a bit more chaotic and a bit more like, oh my god, what is going on? And they kind of push your mind in new directions, whereas this one I feel like he's communicating masterfully his themes and so on, but it's kind of a closed, circuit of meaning that you're going through, where it doesn't push you towards mysterious things in the way that even his Oedipus at Colonus, I think, is a bit more mystical and like kind of, what actually are we talking about here? In Oedipus the King, we know exactly what we're talking about, and which is why I guess people teach it at high school, because it's very easy to understand what the themes are, and like kind of everyone can kind of agree what it's about and what's going on and so on, which is good for if you're writing a high school essay, and if you're a teacher marking a high school essay, then that's very good. But as like art or something like that, then I don't think it's not the best, right? It's not the best. Aristotle, right, he thought it was the best. For some people, this kind of perfection of form is just a sign of like the highest of arts, but not for me, I guess, even though it was absolutely brilliant. I don't know. This probably sounds very confusing, so I should probably end the video. Do let me know if you've read any of these, or if anything I have said has inspired you to reflections of any kind whatsoever, or retorts. Do put them down in the comments and let's chat about it. Otherwise, I'll see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.